Long Beach, California. August 2nd, 1964. Late afternoon. The convention center floor stretched beneath fluorescent lights that cast everything in pale, institutional clarity. Outside, the summer heat pressed against tinted windows, but inside, the air conditioning hummed with mechanical persistence. Folding chairs arranged in loose semicircles faced a small demonstration area, marked only by the scuffed patterns on the linoleum, where countless feet had pivoted and struck over 3 days of competition. The crowd had thinned from the weekend's peak. Most serious competitors had already departed, their trophies wrapped in newspaper, their GIs packed away until the next tournament. What remained were the curious, the skeptical, and a handful of martial artists who had heard whispers about Bruce Lee, the young Chinese instructor scheduled for the final demonstration slot. The whispers carried weight because they came from Ed Parker, whose reputation in American karate circles rendered doubt inadvisable. Parker moved through the scattered audience with the casual authority of a man accustomed to being listened to. His students, easily identifiable by their deference and proximity, had claimed seats in the front row. Behind them, representatives from various schools maintained the careful distance that competitive courtesy required. A few reporters sat with notebooks balanced on their knees, present more from obligation than expectation. Most had never heard of Bruce Lee beyond Parker's introduction in the tournament program. The demonstration area remained empty. Conversations continued in the measured tones that martial artists cultivated when discussing their craft in public spaces. Technical terminology mixed with California colloquialisms. Someone mentioned a new school opening in Torrance. Another voice speculated about tournament rule changes. A third wondered aloud what credentials this Bruce Lee possessed that warranted Parker's endorsement. The mundane business of a community that had grown comfortable with its own boundaries, now facing the prospect of examining something unfamiliar. At 4:20, Bruce Lee emerged from the corridor that led to the preparation rooms. 23 years old, compact in build, he wore black slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hair was longer than convention suggested, swept back in a style that belonged neither to traditional Chinese culture nor contemporary American fashion. He carried no equipment, no visible accessories that might indicate rank or affiliation. His movement across the floor suggested someone accustomed to being watched, but not someone who particularly cared about the watching. The conversations didn't stop, but they shifted in tone. This was their first direct view of Bruce Lee, an instructor whose name appeared on no tournament rosters and whose credentials existed largely through word of mouth. He had been teaching privately in Seattle, then Oakland, building a reputation that traveled faster than official recognition. His students included James Lee, whose own standing in Northern California martial arts circles provided a form of implicit endorsement, but endorsement filtered through layers of cultural translation that left room for interpretation. Parker approached the demonstration area and offered brief introductions, speaking Bruce Lee's name clearly for those who might not have caught it in their programs. His words carried the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual countless times, but with an undercurrent suggesting that this particular introduction required more careful handling than usual. He mentioned Wing Chun, a system most of the audience had heard of, but few had encountered directly. He referenced Lee's background in Hong Kong, where martial arts existed in forms that American practitioners understood only through movies and magazine articles. Bruce Lee began without preamble. No formal bow, no statement of philosophy, no explanation of what the audience should expect to see. He positioned himself in the center of the demonstration area and extended his right arm toward a volunteer from the audience, a karate practitioner whose size and obvious conditioning suggested years of serious training. The volunteer, later identified in scattered accounts as a black belt from a well-regarded school, approached with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to participating in demonstrations without personal risk. What followed challenged the audience's expectations not through its complexity, but through its apparent simplicity. Lee's movements contained none of the elaborate techniques that demonstration audiences had come to anticipate. No high kicks, No dramatic stances, no sequences that built toward obvious climaxes. Instead, Bruce Lee demonstrated concepts through touch, asking the volunteer to feel the difference between force and relaxation, between muscular effort and structural alignment. The volunteer, clearly experienced in cooperative demonstrations, responded with professional competence, but his expressions suggested encounters with unfamiliar principles. Several minutes passed in this exploratory fashion. Members of the audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing sophisticated instruction or elaborate preparation for something more dramatic. The reporters made notes with the detached efficiency of people covering an event they didn't fully understand. A few martial artists in the crowd exchanged glances that suggested recognition of technical elements beyond the general audience's comprehension. Some whispered questions about Bruce Lee's qualifications to be demonstrating at all. Then Lee stepped back and issued what witnesses later described as either a challenge or an invitation, depending on their perspective and their comfort with ambiguity. He asked the volunteer to attempt to strike him, not in demonstration partnership, but with genuine intent. The request carried none of the theatrical aggression that tournament fighting had made familiar. It sounded more like a technical question than a challenge to combat. Several audience members glanced at Parker, wondering if this departure from standard demonstration protocol had been planned, or if Bruce Lee was improvising beyond the agreed boundaries. The volunteer hesitated. This was not a standard demonstration protocol. The audience, sensing a shift towards something unscripted, grew more attentive. Parker watched from the sideline with an expression that suggested he had anticipated this moment without necessarily approving of it. The volunteer, after a pause that stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, agreed. He had come to see what this Bruce Lee could demonstrate. Now he would discover what he could do under pressure. The striking attempt, when it came, displayed the technical competence that years of traditional training had developed. A direct punch, properly chambered, delivered with the force and precision that tournament competition had refined. The technique was sound, the execution clean, the intent unmistakable. The volunteer was testing not just Bruce Lee's defensive ability, but his right to occupy the demonstration platform at all. Bruce Lee's response lasted approximately 1 second. The volunteer found himself on the floor, 8 feet from where he had begun his attack, with no clear memory of the transition between standing and lying down. The audience experienced a moment of collective silence that had nothing to do with respect, and everything to do with the inability to process what their eyes had recorded. Several witnesses later claimed they had seen Lee's intercepting strike clearly. Others insisted that he had simply moved aside and allowed the attacker's momentum to carry him past. A few maintained that the volunteer had somehow lost his balance without any significant contact occurring at all. The volunteer rose slowly, unhurt, but visibly shaken. He looked at Bruce Lee with an expression that contained confusion, embarrassment, and something approaching professional concern. He had felt something during that brief moment of contact, something that his training had not prepared him to understand or counter. He nodded to Lee with careful courtesy, thanked Parker for the opportunity, and returned to his seat without further comment. The questions about Lee's credentials had been answered, though not in the manner anyone had anticipated. Lee did not explain. He moved through several more demonstrations, each focusing on principles rather than techniques, concepts rather than applications. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted permanently. What had been a casual observation became intense scrutiny. What had been polite attention became careful analysis. The audience was no longer watching a demonstration. They were trying to solve the puzzle that Bruce Lee had presented to them. When the session concluded 20 minutes later, the audience's response was notably restrained. Applause came in scattered bursts, rather than unified appreciation. People remained in their seats longer than usual, as if waiting for an additional explanation that never arrived. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, with frequent glances toward Lee, who was accepting thanks from Parker with the same casual demeanor he had maintained throughout. His name was spoken more frequently now, but with uncertainty rather than familiarity. The immediate aftermath produced more questions than answers. Several martial artists approached Bruce Lee directly, seeking clarification about techniques they thought they had seen, principles they thought they had witnessed, and applications they thought they had understood. His responses, according to multiple witnesses, were courteous but incomplete. He spoke about timing, about distance, about the difference between fighting and demonstrating, but offered no specific technical instruction that might satisfy their curiosity. The volunteer who had been thrown maintained dignified silence about his experience, neither claiming injury nor denying the effectiveness of whatever Bruce Lee had employed. When pressed by colleagues for details, he described sensations rather than techniques, a feeling of being moved rather than struck, of encountering force that seemed to appear from unexpected angles, of finding his own momentum redirected in ways that his training had not prepared him to recognize or counter. Within days, accounts of Bruce Lee's demonstration began circulating through California's martial arts community. The stories varied significantly in their details, but maintained consistency in their overall impact. The young Chinese instructor had demonstrated something that traditional American martial arts training had not prepared witnesses to understand or evaluate. Some accounts emphasized the speed of Lee's response. Others focused on the apparent ease with which he had neutralized a competent attacker. A few insisted that the entire exchange had been carefully choreographed, a demonstration designed to create an impression rather than display genuine ability. Official tournament records from the event made no mention of Bruce Lee's demonstration. The Long Beach International Karate Championships had been established as a venue for competition and formal instruction, not for encounters that challenged the established understanding of martial arts effectiveness. The demonstration had occurred outside the tournament's official schedule, organized through Parker's personal discretion rather than formal tournament authority. Photography from the event captured moments before and after the exchange, but no images survived that showed the actual contact or its immediate aftermath. The absence of visual documentation allowed conflicting interpretations to develop without contradiction from objective evidence. This absence would later contribute to debates about what Bruce Lee had actually accomplished, debates that would continue for decades without resolution. Several prominent martial artists who had witnessed Lee's demonstration chose not to discuss it publicly for months afterward. Their silence reflected not dismissal of what they had seen, but uncertainty about how to interpret it within their understanding of martial arts capability. Traditional training had prepared them to evaluate techniques within established categories: strikes, throws, blocks, evasions. What Bruce Lee had demonstrated seemed to exist between these categories, or perhaps beyond them entirely. The volunteer who had participated in the encounter left competitive martial arts within 2 years. When asked about his decision by former colleagues, he cited personal reasons unrelated to his experience with Bruce Lee. He never spoke publicly about the demonstration, maintaining a privacy that some interpreted as dignity and others as professional embarrassment. His silence became part of the event's mythology, additional evidence for those who believed Lee had demonstrated something significant, and further proof of exaggeration for those who preferred more conventional explanations. Bruce Lee's own comments about the demonstration, recorded in scattered interviews over subsequent months, emphasized teaching rather than fighting. He spoke about the importance of understanding principles over techniques, about the limitations of traditional training methods, and about the need for martial arts to evolve beyond their cultural origins. But he offered no specific description of what had occurred during those crucial seconds, no technical analysis that might satisfy the curiosity his demonstration had generated. The Long Beach demonstration became a reference point in discussions of Bruce Lee's abilities, cited by supporters as evidence of revolutionary martial arts understanding, and dismissed by skeptics as an example of carefully orchestrated myth-making. The truth, if it existed in any definitive form, remained embedded in the contradictory testimony of witnesses whose own backgrounds and expectations influenced their interpretation of what they had experienced. Years later, when Bruce Lee's fame had grown beyond martial arts circles, the demonstration would be referenced in magazine articles, television interviews, and biographical accounts. Each retelling added details that previous versions had omitted, removed elements that earlier accounts had emphasized, and shifted the event's context to fit contemporary understanding of Lee's significance. The demonstration evolved from a puzzling encounter into a foundational legend, from an ambiguous moment into decisive proof of exceptional ability. But for those who had been present that August afternoon in Long Beach, the memory retained its original quality of unresolved confusion. They had witnessed Bruce Lee challenge their understanding of martial arts possibilities, demonstrating something that their training had not prepared them to categorize or explain. Whether that something represented genuine revolutionary technique or sophisticated performance remained a question that their experience alone could not answer. The convention center was demolished in 1987, replaced by a shopping complex that bore no indication of its former purpose. The demonstration area where Bruce Lee had puzzled his audience became part of a department store's sporting goods section, where traditional martial arts equipment shared shelf space with exercise videos and fitness supplements. The physical space that had contained that moment of puzzling contact disappeared into the commercial development that California's growth demanded. What remained was testimony, incomplete and contradictory, from witnesses whose certainty about what they had seen diminished rather than solidified over time. They had experienced something that resisted easy explanation, something that challenged their understanding of physical possibility, something that their culture preferred to transform into myth rather than analyze as fact. The demonstration's legacy lay not in what it proved about Bruce Lee's abilities, but in what it revealed about the discomfort that genuine mystery creates in communities that value explanation over wonder. The truth of what occurred during those crucial seconds mattered less than the fact that it had occurred at all, in front of witnesses who could neither forget it nor fully understand it. Bruce Lee had entered their world as a name on a program, left as a question that would outlive everyone who had been present to witness it.